Hey everybody, welcome back to Horror Trans. My name is Stephanie Bree. I am a transgender woman who talks about all things horror. This is the weekly Horror Trans podcast. Got some good stuff to talk about today. Um, so, I've not been watching a lot of movies this past week, unfortunately. Um, I had a really rough week last week. It was very stressful, um, very emotionally draining. I'm not going to get into the details, but it was very rough on me. So I needed some, self-care. And so instead of watching horror movies last week, I started rewatching the original 1987 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated television cartoon program. I'm midway through season 2 at this point. So that's all I've been watching. I have not been watching YouTube. I did watch, okay, I didn't put it on the list, but I did watch WrestleMania over the weekend, both nights. Which is almost horror adjacent, because, spoilers if you haven't seen it yet, but you probably heard about it. Undertaker made an appearance, as did the Judgment Day, and I can't remember what they were called, but Karrion Kross's faction. It's basically the Judgment Day, but it's a different way of saying it. I don't know what they called themselves, but it's like, I don't know, Judgment Day 2.0 or something stupid like that. But anyways, WrestleMania was pretty damn good. I do have some new horror movies coming, and I still have plenty of backlog on my backlog of reviews of movies I have seen that I haven't reviewed yet. So I still have plenty of movies on the list. I'm not gonna run out. So I'll still be able to keep doing reviews. And horror icons. I have plenty of horror icons. I have a list of about 100 plus horror icons to go through, because I'm covering pretty much everybody: actors, directors, special effects people, studios, producers. If they're a horror icon in where they're worth talking about, they're gonna make the list. Speaking of which, if there's a horror icon you want me to talk about, go ahead and leave down in the comments your suggestions. Maybe they're already on the list, but if they're not, I'll thank you and let you know. So I do have a couple of news stories today. Not very many, but 4 or 5 or so. And I'm going to start off with a trailer that dropped yesterday that I haven't watched yet. It's MaXXXine. You've probably already seen it a bajillion times. So let's go ahead and pull up A24's MaXXXine trailer. I'm going to watch it. I have not seen the previous 2 movies in this trilogy yet. I know nothing about them, so I'm going into this trailer completely blind. I have no idea what it is. So if this doesn't sell me on watching this movie or checking out the franchise, I don't know what will. But let's go ahead and give it a play. I don't want it to be too loud for copyright reasons. A24, obviously. Her dream was to be a star. Okay.
If you need to read off the sides we gave you, just go ahead, all right? I know. She turns to the camera and, through her trauma, addresses the lens directly.
1985, alright.
Name 5 celebrities who got their start in horror movies.
Jamie Lee Curtis, John Travolta, Demi Moore, Brooke Shields, and
MaXXXine fucking me. I don't like walking up here.
St. Elmo's Fire now showing. Boo.
Night Stalkers terrorizing Los Angeles.
I can handle myself.
We'll set up a site there in Hollywood.
From director Ty West. They're going hard on the 80s MTV look. Bates Motel. Okay. Oh, shit. So we gotta tie into Psycho, apparently.
defining role of your career.
Whatever's going on in your life that's interfering with the picture. Squash it. I intend to.
It's got a lot of style, but I'm not seeing if there's a lot of substance, but that could be good. A lot of 80s, retro 80s throwback stuff in this, so it could be fun. Although I think that we're a little overplayed on the 80s throwback stuff right now, so it could also just be more overload. Especially if it's an anachronistic, like some of the 80s shit, throwback shit. Written and directed by Ty West. Alright, so I'm not sold. That doesn't look like a movie I am dying to see. Especially because I haven't seen the previous films in the franchise, so I know nothing about what the fuck is going on. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Alright, so not for me, but maybe you enjoy it. Alright, next up. Oh, by the way, that was Bloody Disgusting, but it was a YouTube video, so you probably got it anywhere. Also from Bloody Disgusting, this is The Mummy, Brendan Fraser 90s horror extravaganza action adventure blockbuster, is returning to theaters for 20th anniversary. Let's see. It will return to theaters nationwide on April 26th. They're talking about the film's previous box office. Tickets started selling on April 5th, so that's already that's already passed. Is it a one-day? Let's see. Beginning April 26th. So it doesn't sound like a one-day event, but I'm not seeing any information on how long does it plan to run. Let me scroll back through the article and see if maybe I missed something. Previous box office numbers, synopsis of the film. I've already seen it. I've already reviewed it. Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have a timeline, so it's not a one-day event. So I'm imagining it's just going to run probably as long as it's making money. So go ahead and buy your tickets now, I guess. I don't suspect it's going to sell out, but you never know. Depends on, your local market. This is coming from Dread Central. Spectrum editor Aquino, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Aquino Loaiza, and author John Wiswell talk neurodivergent representation in horror. As someone who is neurodivergent and works with neurodivergent people, this is an interesting article. It says, mental health and horror are so often tackled through the lens of personality disorders or depression. But what about other experiences with neurodivergence? Blah, blah, blah. An anthology, Spectrum, an autistic horror anthology featuring 20 stories by neurodivergent authors. Is this a book? In Spectrum, I'm not going to read the article. You can read it yourself. I'm just going to skim through it. I'm trying to figure out what it is. So this is a full interview with the Dread Central and these two individuals. So go ahead and go to dreadcentral.com and check out this interview if you have any interest in neurodivergent people, or if you yourself are neurodivergent. It's worth checking out. A lot of interesting conversations going on in this article. Okay, it says Barnes & Noble, blah, blah, blah. So it is a book. "20 stories." That's pretty good. Alright. This next story comes from horrornews.net. It says Buffalo Bill's house guided tours for Mother's Day, Father's Day, and Independence Day. Tour the famous film site of the Silence of the Lambs classic. You'll be able to stay overnight, book a guided tour, blah blah blah. Those 3 weekends. It is for limited spring and summer weekends only, and are booking fast during the tours. A small group of guests will be able to visit the home in its entirety as well as the sprawling property. Tours will be conducted by the owner of the house and are expected to last roughly 2 hours. Guests will be permitted to take pictures and reenact scenes from the movie. Tours are $69 per person. There are 9 dates available over those 3 holiday weekends. So if you're interested in that, get on it. Now we got some sadder news. This is coming from Joe Blow Horror. Bill Cohn, the actor from an actor who played in the Phantasm film from 1979, has passed away. It says Bill Cohn only had 1 acting credit to his name. Blah blah blah. Cohn plays a character named Tommy, and it's his death that gets the story rolling. We have to report that Bill Cohn has passed away, sadly. Looks like he was involved in the soundtrack for Phantasm and another movie, Kinney and Company, from the same filmmaker. So, an obscure horror actor who played in one very iconic horror film has passed away. So there you go. And from iHorror.com, we have Soska Sisters add a chapter to Romero's classic in Festival of the Living Dead. It says the Festival of the Living Dead could be called a sequel, or it could be considered an homage. It launched April 5th on Tubi, so it's already out. I may have already talked about this. I don't remember. Alright, it says, synopsis. Looking for fun, Ash and her friends attend the Festival of the Living Dead, but it is disrupted when a blast of radioactive space dust hits the festival and they must defend themselves or be devoured by the living dead. It is tied to the Romero original in that the kids are the grandchildren of Ben, the African-American man and tragic hero of the original Night of the Living Dead. So, I do remember reporting on that, probably last week, but it's out now on Tubi if you want to watch it. So maybe I'll put it on the list. This looks like it could be fun. That's all I have for news. So let's go ahead and get into topics. My first topic is centered around Jason Voorhees. Specifically, what the fuck is he? So, I know starting with Jason Lives, there's a common theory, we'll say, among fans that Jason is a zombie. they refer to Jason post Jason Lives as Zombie Jason. Now, I could very easily debunk this. He's not a zombie. And the reason why I can say that with definitive confidence is he gets shot in the head multiple times in Jason Lives, as well as several movies later. So he is very clearly not a zombie. Now, we later learn, if you watch Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, we find out, due to an appearance at the Necronomicon, them dismembering his body, his soul transferring from body to body. We learn, now this is coming from Sean Cunningham, which is odd, but we find out that Zombie Jason is actually a Deadite. This is a pretty easy fan theory to, get on board with. So, yeah, sure, let's retcon the series. But I'm not satisfied with that either. Because Jason doesn't exhibit any personality at all. And he never speaks or laughs or jokes. And the Deadites very clearly are verbal. So, I do not fully buy the fan theory that Zombie Jason is a Deadite either. So, that begs the question, what the fuck is he? But I want to go back even further. Now, I talked a little bit about this in my live stream when I was watching the final chapter a couple weeks ago. Jason Voorhees was very clearly dead at the end of Friday the 13th Part 3. We know this for a couple of reasons. One, the coroners pick up his body, or the EMTs, I should say, the paramedics, pick up his body, put it on the gurney, and he's not breathing. There's no pulse. They're like, oh, he's dead. He's fucking dead. He's not taking a nap. Because they would have said somewhere, they're paramedics, they would have said, hey, he's still alive, let's get him to the hospital. No, they take him to the morgue and shove him in a freezer. So, that to me says he was dead at the end of Friday the 13th Part 3. Now, that is, to me, very definitive. That's not debatable for me. Because we see him sort of just reanimate. Now, I know he doesn't get the lightning strike. Nobody eats his heart. We have nobody reading from the Necronomicon, so how could he be reanimated? Well, let's pause for a second. There is no explanation, scientific or mystical or magical or otherwise, of why the dead reanimate in the Night of the Living Dead, Day, Dawn of the Dead franchise. None at all. It just happens. And we don't ever get a reason why it happened. We don't get a cause. It just sort of started one day. So I can accept that Jason just sort of came back to life. Not just because we saw it in the Living Dead series, but also Michael Myers was very definitively dead. Definitively dead at the end of Halloween, came back for Halloween 2, definitively dead at the end of Halloween 2, came back for Halloween 4, and I would argue has been definitively dead at the end of every Halloween movie he dies, so he comes back supernaturally at the beginning of every subsequent Halloween movie. I'm going to stand by this. So I'll also accept that his knockoff counterpart, Jason Voorhees, which is basically just a low-rent but more popular, in my opinion, or more superior Michael Myers, because I prefer Jason to Michael Myers anyways, but I've already beat that dead horse. But let's go back to Friday the 13th Part 2. Before we go into the retconning, we're gonna in a second, but before we get into the retconning, let's just talk about the events of Friday the 13th Part 2. He shows up fully animated as a grown-ass adult, vengeful, trying to avenge his mother's decapitation following the events of the first film. This movie takes place 5 years later. Now, at the end of this movie, Ginny very decisively shoves a machete into his goddamn heart. She doesn't miss. she strikes his heart. He's dead. He is dead at the end of Friday the 13th, too. So he's already reanimated going into Friday the 13th Part 3. Before we even get to the new chapter, or the final chapter, before we even get to Jason Lives. So, again, he gets an axe to the head at the end of Friday the 13th 3, which we know didn't definitively kill him, even though he was already dead, definitively. Which means, again, he wasn't a zombie at the end of Friday the 13th 2, but he was a reanimated corpse. Now, he hasn't begun to rot and decompose yet, because he hadn't been buried under the ground. But see, that's the caveat. That's the kicker. He is seen as deteriorating from Friday the 13th Part 2, and then 3, and then 4. He does deteriorate in each film. He gets uglier. He gets more deformed in each film. Now, you could very easily just chalk this up to the filmmakers wanting to top the previous film, so the special effects go a little harder each subsequent film. Or you could look at it in canon. Yeah, he is rotting. He's just still, kicking around, above ground. And then at the end of the final chapter, he gets buried, and now he's underground being eaten by worms and maggots and centipedes, etc., but beetles, everything else. So that's why he looks even more decomposed when he reanimates in Jason Lives, which is where people, I would say erroneously, mistake him as his first reanimation. That's all fine and well and everything, but we still have to go back to that retcon. We have to go back to the retcon. In Friday the 13th, Jason died. At the end of even at the beginning of the movie, before the movie started, his death was the catalyst. Now, Jason is, I'm going to say, depicted as mentally handicapped or mentally challenged. I'm not going to diagnose him, what his mental health issue is, but he is. He's very obviously some sort of mentally challenged, mentally disabled individual. Okay, this is very clear. It's clear in the flashbacks. It's clear in future film depictions, and even in the flashbacks we see in the scenes in Freddy vs. Jason. So we can say definitively, baby Jason Voorhees, had he drowned on Friday the 13th in 1957, had he not drowned, let's backpack, because I got that backwards. Had he not drowned, maybe he washed up unconscious on the other side of the lake, didn't get discovered, and he lives in the woods for 20 years. Jason knows his mom worked at Camp Crystal Lake. She knows this. Because he attended Camp Crystal Lake. So he does return repeatedly to Camp Crystal Lake. And he even returns after his mother gets beheaded. And he retrieves her body and her head and her clothes and sets up a shrine to her that we see in Friday the 13th Part 2. So we know he is aware enough of his surroundings to know that Camp Crystal Lake equals mommy. That's where mommy is. And he would know this. So it is not believable at all that Jason survived drowning and stayed in the woods for 20 years, knowing his mom was back at Camp Crystal Lake, and he never went looking for her. That's not believable. Because he's a simple-minded, disabled individual. He would have been fixated on finding mommy. And he knew where mommy was. Mommy was there the whole time. So there is no logical, justifiable reason for him to just hide in the woods. At all. So we can rule that out. We can throw that aside. The retcon is bullshit. It doesn't work. Also, Pamela Voorhees says they let that boy drown. He died on Friday the 13th, 1957. She doesn't say he went missing. If he went under the water, they never retrieved the body, and he washed up ashore, I don't know, 2 or 3 days later, they never found him and he was living in the woods, she wouldn't have said he drowned. She would have said he disappeared. She would have known that, because she would have looked for him. As obsessed as she was with her son, as obsessed as she was with killing anyone associated or affiliated with Camp Crystal Lake, she would have been driven enough. If she thought her son was still, there was a chance he was missing and still alive, she was driven enough. She would have combed the lake. She would have combed that woods. She would have found him. Because he was also likewise driven to be looking for her. There is no logical explanation for how those two didn't come across each other in the 20 years between 1957, or however many years it was, between 1957 and 1979. He would have absolutely showed up. Now, also, again, going back to the retcon, we see baby Jason, or child Jason, clearly a reanimated corpse, we've already established that he does that, come out of the lake at the end of Friday the 13th for the final jump scare. Spoilers if you haven't seen it, but I already spoiled it, so I guess, whatever. Anyway, so we already know he was still alive, or he was dead, but reanimated at the end of that movie. So we already know that. We've established that. But he was a child. Or a child's body at the end of that movie. He had 20 years to grow in the lake, but he didn't. He never aged. Now, I've heard that explained away as, that was just a dream sequence, but it wasn't. They found her in the lake where she was attacked. She passed out, and they found her later. So, again, we can dismiss the retcon. Now we have to ask 2 questions. What was he doing between 1957 and 1984 when Friday the 13th Part 2 takes place? And how did he age from, I'm going to say, 10-year-old Jason to obviously 35-year-old Jason, possibly older? How did he age? So, we could take the easy way out. The easy way out is the Deadite thing from Jason Goes to Hell. Oh, he was body hopping the whole time. So that's why he looks different film to film, because, the reason he looks different film to film is because he's portrayed by a different actor film to film. But we could, in universe, say, oh no, he's just been body hopping the whole time. I would almost allow that. Accept it, whatever, buy it, whatever you want to go with. Except for, he still has the deformed face each film. He still looks like Jason. Also, we know that for him to appear as Jason, the demon spirit, deadite, snake monster, whatever it is, has to inhabit the corpse of a Vorhees. Now, again, at this point in time, we know that there's Pamela, his mother. She's already dead. He does have her head on display in the cabin in Friday the 13th, too. So it's possible, it's conceivable, okay? If we're going to take the John Cunningham New Line Cinema Jason Goes to Hell lore into account and retcon, it's conceivable he entered his mother's body, reanimated and reformed as, we'll say, Ghoul Jason for now, instead of Deadite or Zombie Jason. And that's why he kept his mother's head, because, her body reformed into his, final form, air quotes. And so that could explain how he got a new body from, the events of Friday the 13th to Friday the 13th Part 2, and it would also explain why he's now a grown adult when he was a kid in that 5 years, because he aged a lot more than 5 years. Also, there's other Voorhees. His dad is not in the picture. So it's conceivable somewhere in between any number of films, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 6, whatever, At some point in time, he tracked down his dad and entered his dad's body when he needed to, in between whichever film, to reanimate. I'm not going to accept that because let's just assume he got Pamela's body in 79 and he kept it until Jason Lives. Let's just assume that's Pamela's reanimated, reformatted body. I would almost accept that, almost, over any other existing fan theory. I would consider it more plausible than some of the other fan theories. Except for we see him die at the end of Friday the 13th Part 2, so that body would have been expired. He would have needed a new body. But he's very clearly in the same body from 2 to 3. Even though it's a different actor, we see him get up and walk out the door moments after he died. So again, he didn't have time to body hop. So we can throw that theory out the window. We can now scratch that off the list. Now, Jason appears to be, I would estimate, around 35-ish years old at the start of Friday the 13th Part 2. Now, we don't ever see his face, but we're judging this based on his build. Now, we had Child Jason. Okay, follow me. Follow along. Child Jason, 1979, was reanimated. I'm going to go with his mother's death, released her decapitation, released her spirit, and her spirit being released allowed him to be reanimated at 10 years old. So, between 1979 and 1984, when Friday the 13th Part 2 takes place, we have 5 years. So, he would only be 15 years old. So, most Friday the 13th fans are going to throw this theory I'm proposing out the window because they're going to dismiss it and say he's too old to be 15 years old. Except I can counter that with two points that we see in film. The first point, because I'm going to stipulate that Jason is 15 years old at the beginning of Friday the 13th Part 2. That's my theory. That's where I'm going with this. How can I defend that? Alright, so he gets reanimated in 1979. Again, he's mentally disabled. We don't know. The word they use in the film, I'm not going to use here. I've heard other people use, comparable but equally problematic words. We're just going to avoid those altogether. But we're going to say mentally disabled. Alright? And he's physically deformed somehow. Now, he's reanimated. He is a ghoul at this point. He is no longer human. Now, he's not quite a zombie, but we're going to say ghoul because it's a little easier to it's a little more palatable. It's easier to swallow. So, at this point, he's a ghoul from starting in 1979. But there's some supernatural forces at play. There has to be. So, he's reanimated. So, I'm gonna backtrack. Because I don't know if ghoul even works. I'm going to say resurrected. He's not reanimated. He's fully resurrected. Okay? He is alive. Alive. Which is going to retcon what I said at the start of this video. He's alive in 1979 when he comes out of the lake. He was resurrected Phoenix style when his mom died. Alright? Let me finish. So, he's now living tissue. 10-year-old body. He goes into the woods because his mom's dead. She can't take care of him anymore. And he knows Crystal Lake is not home anymore because, it's deserted. So he finds a cabin or builds a cabin in the woods, whatever. With his simple mind. He does the best he can to survive. Eating rats and small dogs and squirrels, etc. to survive. So far, so good, right? Okay. But he's only 15 years old in 1984 when the events of Friday the 13th 2, 3, and 4 take place. But he's bulky. He's a bulky dude. He's muscular. He's a bodybuilder, right? Well, he's living in the woods. He's eating. He's a survivalist, right? He's living off the land. Now, we know, quote-unquote mountain men, or we know, wild people who, feral people who are raised in the wild. They are pretty bulky. Look at I know it's fictional, but we're going to reference, a lot of this is fictional anyways. But let's reference Tarzan. Tarzan was a scrawny little kid when he was abandoned in the jungle, but he grows up to be, Arnold Schwarzenegger, levels of buff as an adult. So I'll allow it because he has to, it's survival of the fittest. He's a wild animal living in the woods. He has to kill animals with his bare hands. He has to, what is he going to do? He's building that house with his bare hands, no tools, or primitive tools, maybe rocks, So he has to survive on his own. What does he do? When he's, he's walking all the goddamn time. He's lifting. He's bulking up. So I would accept that he is a bulky-ass 15-year-old. Now I'm going to reference another thing we've seen in film, Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, is 17 years old. He is played by, I think, a 27-year-old actor, but he looks like he could be in his 30s. But he's buff. He is as physically built at 17 years old as we see Jason in the other films. And we also see him in flashbacks. The misdirect in that film wants you to believe Tommy Jarvis is actually dressing up and copycatting Jason, which works because he's physically built at 17 years old. Now I know 15 is 2 years younger than 17, but because we have seen bulky ass, dudes in these films who look like grown-ass adults who are supposed to be teenagers, because a lot of times they are grown-ass adults playing teenagers, we can definitely suspend disbelief enough to say, all right, Jason is 15. He's a bulky 15, but he's been living in the woods for 5 years, eating raw, wolves and dogs and squirrels and chickens and whatnot. Bulking up. All right, I'll allow it. So, but there's still the supernatural force that resurrected him, not reanimated him. I'm going with resurrected him. Resurrected him. Okay? So he gets mortally wounded at the end of Friday the 13th too, but the supernatural force heals him. We do find out from Jason X, he has regenerative capabilities. So that resurrection, we'll just say he regenerates at the end of part 2. And we'll take that from 2 to 3. He regenerates from 3 to 4, which does track with what we see on film. And then he gets buried under in the dirt and the coffin, and the lightning. So when he dies at the end of 4, his brain is destroyed. Okay? And again, he doesn't have a body to body hop, right? But we've already dismissed the body hopping. But we're going to go back to the spiritual whatever. Now, so his mother dying is what resurrected him from 1 to 2, and that spiritual force kept him alive until the end of the final chapter, when he was dead again. Now he's dead. And then the bolt of lightning at the start of Jason Lives reanimates, not resurrects, his corpse. So this is when he goes from resurrected Jason, who we see, in 2, 3, and 4, to zombie Jason going forward, or reanimated corpse Jason going forward. And I'm going to go with reanimated corpse over zombie Jason, even though zombie is just sort of shorthand. It isn't. It doesn't work because he gets shot in the head multiple times and he doesn't die. So, then at the end of Friday the 13th, at the end of Jason Takes Manhattan, we see a lot of dream sequences and stuff like that. I'm going to argue when he reverts to child Jason at the end of that movie, his soul is at rest. He has passed on. He's moved on into the afterlife. Okay? And sometime between Jason Takes Manhattan and Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, sometime between those two films, somebody in the Voorhees family finds the Necronomicon and summons Jason's soul back out of hell. And that's where we get, you know, him at the start of Jason Goes to Hell, and he gets dismembered, and that's why his soul has to do the body hopping, because between Jason Takes Manhattan and Jason Goes to Hell, sometime in that however many years took place, is when he becomes a Deadite. So, Friday the 13th, he's dead, gets resurrected as a living human for Friday the 13th, 2, 3, and 4, killed at the end of 4. A bolt of lightning reanimates his corpse, reawakening his soul somehow. We'll go with it. Jason lives 6, we'll just say 6, 7, and 8. And then at the end of 8, he dies again, but this time he's at peace because he's like, you know what, fuck it. Whatever. For whatever reason, he's at peace, and his soul leaves his body, passes on to the afterlife. At that point, he's a ghost. Somebody in his family playing around with the supernatural forces for whatever reason, not resurrects, but we'll say channels, I'll go with channels his spirit, which was a ghost at this point, and puts him in his body, and then he becomes a Deadite. So from Jason Goes to Hell on, Jason is a Deadite, but he's physically deformed, and he's mentally disabled, so he doesn't have the verbal skills. We're going to assume he was nonverbal as a child. We don't see any evidence otherwise, and we see plenty of evidence that he doesn't speak, so we're going to assume he never learned how to speak. He was always nonverbal. This would account for why there's no laughter, why there's no verbiage coming out of him, no vocalization coming out of him post becoming a Deadite. Because he can't. He just doesn't have words in his head. He doesn't own words in his brain. He doesn't have that capability. He just doesn't possess words. So I'll allow it. So from Jason Goes to Hell on, which takes us into Jason X and Freddy vs. Jason, he is now a Deadite. But, alright, we have to backtrack one more time. From Jason Goes to Hell, his body gets destroyed, the Deadite gets dismembered and buried. The Deadite gets released. So Jason's soul, again, is separated from his body. He's laid to rest. Now, we're going to time jump. Freddy Krueger in 2003, well, in Freddy vs. Jason, we don't know the time. We don't know what year it is, but bear with me. In Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy goes into hell, disguised as Pamela, and summons Jason, giving him a new body, or reanimating his dead body, whatever. Freddy's got powers. We'll just say he gives him a new body, why not? He gives himself a new body from film to film, so I'll allow it. And then following the events of Freddy vs. Jason, we'll say he either carries on or goes dormant until Jason X. So I think this theory solves all of our problems. It gives us, pseudo-zombie Jason, but it also gives us a better explanation for what he was doing in the woods between 57 and 79, because he wasn't in the woods. He was dead. He was dead in 1957 and was resurrected in 1979, and then resurrected Jason, grew up in the woods. Maybe he did 5,000 push-ups a day, I don't know. Maybe he's just lifting logs or whatever, eating live animals. Yeah, he bulked up. So he's 15 years old in 1984 at the start of Friday the 13th Part 2. And I'm going to stand by that. That's my theory. That's my explanation for how you make sense of the convoluted what the fuck is Jason in the Friday the 13th film franchise. And I think if you follow this logically as I've laid out, to me, this makes the most sense out of any other fan theory I've heard. So the question I posit to you is, did I lay out a believable fan theory? Do you agree with me? Or are you going to punch holes in my theory and then I have to try again in a future video? Stay cool. That's the end of this. That's all I have for today.